and welcome everybody to another wonderful episode of Joey's Legacy Roundtable, where we sit down with our animal specialist panel who will be answering your questions about veterinary care and animal law. And before we begin, I just want to make a note that the views and expressions that are often voiced in the chats and by our guests are not always reflective of Joey's legacy and our views and policies. So just please be kind and courteous to each other in the chat, to our guests, and we're going to have a wonderful evening. With that being said, I'm Colleen, one of your hosts for this evening, accompanied by my wonderful co-host, Mr. Scott Fine. Scott, how are you doing?
Hey, Colleen, how are you doing this evening?
Hi, happy Sunday, happy Easter Sunday if you celebrate.
Absolutely, and this is a very special podcast because we have two very special people that have a great deal of expertise in their areas of endeavor. Dr. Judy Morgan, of course, everyone knows, renowned author and veterinarian, and of course, founder of Boston Dog Lawyers, attorney Jeremy Cohen. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. Absolutely.
Well, we're so happy to have you. We have so many questions. As always, anyone who's tuning in live can drop a question in the chat. We'll try our best to get to it, but we already have a lot. So I'm going to kick us off for our first question with Dr. Judy. What are your thoughts about vet techs bringing dogs and cats to the back room alone for simple procedures? And what would you suggest to pet parents who are uncomfortable having their pet separated in those moments?
So it is common practice, and actually since I retired and sold my practices, I'm now on the other side of the table. And the veterinarian that I currently go to, they actually do take my animals to the back away from me. And I feel very comfortable with them. I interviewed them. I made sure that I was comfortable with what they were doing and that they had a very clear understanding of what they would be doing with my animals in the back. So I'm very comfortable with that. But if you're not comfortable, what I would say is that if they say, I'm going to take your animal to the back, that you need to speak up and say, well, I'd really like to be present. Can we do that in the room? Never be afraid to speak up and say, no, I really don't want you to take them away from me. I want to be here. This is why I want to be here. And open that conversation. I think that I honestly think that with the veterinarian I'm working with now, if I said, no, I either want to go with you or I want you to do that here, they absolutely would. And I know in my own practice, if somebody said, no, I want to be present. And part of the reason that the animals get taken away is sometimes owners get really upset with blood draws or injections or how the animals are held. It may look like they're being overly restrained, but there's a special positioning that they have to be in for blood draws and that sort of thing. There are some things where the owners are not allowed to be present. So for instance, for radiographs, you are not allowed to be in the x-ray room. So there are some things where you really cannot be with them, but never be afraid to speak up and say, no, I want to do this differently, and open that conversation.
Would you say that like the veterinarians taking them back for procedures has become more common, less common, or is it just like you said, depending on what procedure it is, it's relatively normal?
Both. I think it depends on the practice. It depends on the owner. It depends on the animal. Some of the animals are much better away from the owners, and some of them are much better with the owners. So we really kind of had to judge. Like there were some animals I literally could not get on the same side of the room with the animal and the owner, but if the owner handed the animal to me and I walked away with the animal, then the animal was my best friend. Some of them guard their owners. Some of them, if the owner is showing emotion or upset, it transfers to the animal. So it's totally a case-by-case basis. I do think, especially since we went through COVID where the animals were, the owners were left outside and the animals were taken inside, I think it's gotten a little more commonplace where the veterinarians are like, wow, this is a lot easier not having to do this in front of the owners. So I think it has gotten a little more commonplace, but it doesn't have to be. And so again, just speak up and know what's best for your animal. And again, like I said, there are some animals where the owners just knew, like, I know I have to leave the room or you can't get near them. It really is is an individual thing.
That's great. Thank you for that. Switching over to Jeremy. So if you can prove that a veterinarian altered records, then can that be prosecuted? We've covered this before, but but can you go into depth on if that can be prosecuted criminally or only in civil court, and the specifications behind each of those?
So it's a good question, and we're always looking for ways to hold vets accountable, and that's sort of what this whole Joey's Legacy is about. I think they're in violation of state regulations. They're in violation of the vet who alters records is in violation of the American Veterinary Medical Association regulations. And depending on what types of records they were altering, or if it becomes part of a civil action, a suit against the vet, there could be, I don't see criminal charges for that type. I see criminal charges people suggest for cruelty and neglect, true crimes. And I'm not saying that veterinarians have committed those crimes, but I think that altering records is certainly worthy of the local board getting involved, the division of licensure in each state. I think it's certainly an indicator that helps if you are part of a civil action and you're filing a lawsuit against the vet to find altered records or things that are things that have been whited out. But I don't think it rises to the level of criminal act.
Got it. That would be like a very specific scenario if it were to get to that level.
It would have to be, I think, something where they're altering records that have to do with a crime. So maybe if they're doing a necropsy and there's a defendant because of a cruelty case. I am representing a pet owner right now whose dog was shot with birdshot for chasing a pet duck allegedly, and then that didn't kill the dog. So the person who owned the duck strangled the dog to death and then hid the dog. But in the necropsy, if the veterinarian there, if they knew the defendant or had an impact on the criminal case, that person is being prosecuted for cruelty, then I think it would have more of an impact, some type of an action that a judge in court could hold the vet accountable. But I know I hear it happens a lot, but I have to tell you, in the cases that I've received and gone through, I just haven't seen where records have been altered. Not saying it doesn't happen, but I don't think it's as common as people think it is.
Okay.
I've actually seen it.
Really?
Yeah. When I opened my second practice, I opened it 9/10 of a mile away from the local veterinarian, and he had a very, very low quality practice. And I had a dog that came to me. The dog actually had a case of Demodex mites. And when the owner came in, this dog it was a rescue dog, and he had literally no hair, bright red, itching, horrible, and he'd been treated with loads and loads and loads of steroids, which just kept making it worse, which is what we will see when we have a mite infestation that we're treating with steroids. And so I said to the owner, did the dog ever had skin scrapes? And she said, no. And I said, did they ever mention mites? No. And we had a lot of cases that came from that veterinarian to us that, they hadn't been diagnosed. And when the records finally got to me, they had been modified to say that he had done multiple skin scrapings. Usually his records, like a dog could be seen by him for 10 years and have one page of records because everything would just say DHLPP, rabies. There was never anything about an exam because he didn't do them. There was never anything about any kind of diagnostics. They weren't done. But yet when those records came in, you could see where he went back, and because she went back and questioned him, the dog never left her sight, so she knew that nothing had been done. And yet those records were modified all over the place. So from that particular veterinarian, I looked on the state board. He had been brought up to the board dozens of times, and every time he got a slap on the wrist, never had anything done, nothing against his license ever. Just incident like that, one after another after another. And so I actually got to the point where I was submitting his records and saying these are falsified records. and I was actually bringing charges against a colleague, which I don't do lightly, but this was probably one of the most egregious, I mean, just one thing after another. One client came to me and said, I went there and he was standing in the parking lot euthanizing a box of kittens in the parking lot. Who does that? So there are veterinarians who do falsify his records, and you just have to kind of know what you're looking for. And something like that, that's not something that would be a malpractice. I mean, it was malpractice. We got the dog turned around very easily, but it's kind of one of those things. I don't think because the dog didn't die, the dog suffered for another year. But it's not something that's going to be brought to a lawyer. So something like that, Jeremy's not going to see. Certainly if the dog had died from the mistreatment, that would be a different story. And I think that there were probably a lot of cases that did die from that particular clinic. But yeah, there definitely are veterinarians out there that do those things.
And to follow up real quickly, a big problem is when people ask for their records and don't get them in time or timely. Then we fill in the gaps that they must be doing something with the records. There's something to hide. We send out a lot of record requests. Why places wait and don't send the records? I understand now because they're overloaded. Everybody's doing 2 or 3 jobs at the same time, but that delay, that's what causes at least suspicions as to what's happening right now. Because you should be able to ask for the records and have them electronically sent to you almost simultaneously.
Yep.
Man, that's so unfortunate. So after a lawsuit is won for the victim, would it be possible to then prosecute the vet board if they originally failed to cite the infractions to provide the protection, or suspend the vet and revoke their license? Is that a possibility?
Well, so I think you're talking about after, if we have a client we've been able to show the vet committed malpractice, after the civil case. So if there was some type of financial compensation, can they then go after the vet criminally or administratively with the board or something like that? I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah, like after the lawsuit is proven to be won, then following up after that lawsuit, would you be then able to prosecute the vet board that originally failed to catch that?
So first off, most of these cases settle. They get to a certain point and they don't go to trial. And what happens is the pet owner has to make a decision. If I take this money, I'm signing a non-disclosure agreement. I'm agreeing not to discuss the findings or what happened here, and no one's accepted liability. So one thing is the pet owner kind of agrees. You can't sort of pay somebody not to testify against you, but at the same time, it's an agreement. This is all the problem with the vet board. I mean, if we had vet boards that did their job, cases wouldn't be coming to me, but they're ineffective. I haven't heard of suing the vet board for not picking it up, but that's a great idea. I like it because we have to hold these people accountable. I would have no problem, and they're all, something has to change their behavior. So if that came in through a question or suggestion, I like it. Go after them for not doing their job.
Okay, so the person files a complaint with the vet board. Vet board dismisses the entire thing as per usual. Then they proceed against the veterinarian in civil court, and they succeed in civil court. So like Colleen was saying, it's the same thing. Can they go back and go after the vet board for malfeasance, dereliction of duty, et cetera, et cetera? And you say that's a great idea, or I don't want to misquote you.
Oh, I think that's hot. That's a great way to police everything. If they actually did their job,
right,
that is probably the quickest way or the soundest way to affect behavior globally of better practices by veterinarians than suing one at a time to try to change them locally.
I learned something tonight.
I will let you know what I find out about that.
Yeah, I actually like it.
I love it. Great.
So we have a question that was sent in for Dr. Judy. So this question revolves around the premise of we have an epidemic of chronically ill pets that are often diagnosed because of the overuse of steroids or constant bombardment of chemicals and pesticides. And so this person says that regarding the viewpoint of Addison's disease from the Western medical standpoint, they know that view, but is there a different viewpoint that would cause adrenal damage, perhaps from Eastern medicine or a holistic viewpoint?
Well, adrenal damage. So Addison's disease, it can be inherited or it can be acquired. And acquired Addison's disease is basically the adrenal glands give up. They've had so much adrenal stress, they absolutely cannot do it anymore. And it's basically become an autoimmune disease. So this is something that I harp on all the time: over vaccination, overuse of chemicals, environmental toxins, pesticides that we're giving to our pets, the immune system, and the horrible food and synthetic ingredients that are added to the food. All of that, the body just looks at as foreign invaders. And so the body's in a constant state of stress. The immune system overreacts, and that's when the immune system attacks, and very commonly attacks the endocrine system. So that's going to be the pancreas, the adrenal glands, the pituitary gland, the thyroid gland. So when we see these animals with Addison's disease, very commonly they have other endocrine diseases going on along with that. And yes, it is a problem related to poor diet, over vaccination, immune stress from pesticides are a horrible thing. This is my whole platform of talking about the things that we are doing that are damaging our animals. And if there's one thing I could do in life, I would love to convince veterinarians that feeding our animals pesticides and vaccinating them every year, just horrible. Even the AVMA and AHA have on their website that we should not be vaccinating with core vaccines any more often than every 3 to 5 years. Yet when interviewed, 60% of veterinarians still vaccinate annually. Why? So we need a huge change within the industry, but we also need a huge change with boarding, daycare, grooming, training, because a lot of them are saying, nope, you've got to have your vaccines up to date. I want to see a certificate that says you have it every year. So it's industry-wide. It's not just veterinary-wide, industry-wide. And even for import export, so to send your animal overseas, and in order to get that import export certificate, you have to show that they've been treated with a chemical pesticide, that they've had vaccines within the last 12 months. So there's just so much change that needs to occur in the entire pet industry. It's not even just the veterinarians, but certainly the veterinarians listen to the pharmaceutical companies, they listen to big pet food, and we need to change that from within. And unfortunately, I think it's going to have to come from the pet owners. I think that's the driving force right now.
So if I were a pet owner that really had no idea of where to even begin the research on what vaccinations are absolutely necessary and which ones are just pushed upon by certain bad actors, what can I do to start narrowing that information and those resources down?
There's a ton of blogs on my website, drjudymorgan.com, but my first book, which is about 8 years old now, From Needles to Natural, the longest chapter in the book is on vaccines. And it describes every single vaccine for dogs and cats, what they are, what they prevent against, how long they last, how many you should give, whether you should even give them. So that's a huge resource right there, very concise, in about a 40-page chapter that literally goes through them one by one. Dr. Jean Dodds also has a vaccine protocol on her website. Hers is different than mine. She actually recommends a couple more than I do. So it just really depends on lifestyle of your pet. There really is no one size fits all. So when you go to your veterinarian, if they say to you, look, every puppy gets a series of 4 vaccines, and if you miss one, you have to start over. Wrong. And so you really need to have a conversation. What's the lifestyle of your animal? Who are they exposed to? What are they exposed to? Where do they go? What are you doing? It's totally different for every single animal.
Okay, that's great. And does it Does it, because I'm also kind of new to all this, does it matter? I know the vaccines vary depending on the age of the animal and what type of, animal it is, but do breeds also become a factor in vaccinations as well?
Actually, potentially yes, because parvovirus seems to be a bigger problem in certain breeds, pit bulls, Labradors, and for most dogs, we would say that your last parvo vaccine could be at 14 to 16 weeks, but some of those dogs, we actually have to look at one being given at 20 weeks. But that doesn't mean that you have to give a combination vaccine where there's like 5 in 1. It might be just a single parvo. But we use blood titers, do a blood test to look at, do they have protective immunity? And if they do, no more vaccines needed. But there are specific breeds that do tend to have a little bit higher risk for certain diseases.
Gotcha. Okay.
I have a question, Dr. Morgan. Why? I've heard, because people have come to me and said, they gave my Chihuahua the same amount of vaccine that they gave my German Shepherd. Is that true? And is that a problem?
Well, that's when the vaccine companies made the vaccines, it's almost everything is 1 cc. And whether you have a Chihuahua or a German Shepherd or a Great Dane, it's the same dose. Now, Dr. Rob started microdosing the rabies vaccine and giving lower doses. He lost his license for it, unfortunately. The bad news is we don't have enough testing. So it would require that the vaccine company would take a bunch of dogs of different sizes, give them different doses of vaccine, and then test them a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, see what their titers were, see what their immunity was, and then do challenge studies. And that's very difficult to do. So it has always been, because it's we look at the immune system, not the size of the dog, but the immune system in general. So it's like, this is how many particles of the killed virus have to be given to stimulate an immune system. And we don't look at the immune system as having a size. So that's how it's always been done. I can say this now because I'm retired, but I did start microdosing some of my tiny dogs, and then we would do titers, and we did just fine. But even the kitty cats are given a 1 cc dose of rabies, which is the same that a Great Dane would be given. So we don't have good studies, and until somebody's willing to do those studies, we don't know.
Which is amazing, because we study. We certainly. I was at a function yesterday regarding beagles, and we use so many beagles to study for human medicine, but we're not using any dogs to study for canine medicine.
Yeah, and I don't even know in human medicine. So I know, like, I have a granddaughter, so they get their MMR and they get their DPT and whatever all those kid vaccines are. And the thing is, if they get a MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella, like I remember getting it in high school, and I'm sure I had it when I went to kindergarten. So I think the same exact dose is given to that 4 or 5-year-old who weighs 40 pounds or 35 pounds as a high school kid who might weigh 150 pounds. So I think it's kind of the same even in human medicine. And I don't know if anybody's really looked at, do we need a lower dose? I don't know. I'm not an immunologist. I guess we would have to ask the vaccine companies what's been looked at. But I do think that it's because they look at the immune system as an immune system, not an immune system based on size of the being that it's being given to.
Makes sense.
I've got a question for, I guess both of you can answer this one, and then I've got one for Jeremy. We had a case this past week where an equine was given a pain med that the owner told the veterinarian he's had severe reactions previously. He was temporarily paralyzed. Don't give him this one, give him this other one, which he's never had a reaction with. The vet ignored the instruction or the request. gave the drug that drug, which caused, again, paralysis and more damaging effects. And the horse had to be euthanized. So from both of you, what comments would you have about that? And what obviously we now know what should have been done, but what do you think, Dr. Morgan?
Well, clearly the veterinarian was closed-minded and thought that the owner didn't know what they were talking about. So I think if you have an animal who's had a reaction, this wasn't the veterinarian who had worked on the horse before, they would have already known that. And if it was the same practice, if it was a veterinarian within the same practice, it should have been documented within the practice notes. If it was somebody from a different practice, they didn't have a history with that animal. Two things. One, the owner should have really been adamant. And it sounds like, they did their part of informing the veterinarian. The veterinarian clearly didn't listen. So I would look at that and say, well, that is malpractice. You were told and you did what you wanted to anyway. So obviously it's malpractice. But for owners in the future, I would say if your animal has a reaction to anything, whether it's an anesthetic, an antibiotic, anything, the veterinarian that you're working with at the time that reaction happens, make sure you have that documented, you have that in your phone, on a piece of paper, whatever. So this is what I tell people all the time: get copies of all your records, all your lab work, everything. Have that in your phone, in a binder, I don't care. So that when you are working with a new veterinarian, you have that right there and you can say, look, here it is. Here's where the problem happened. We cannot use this. It's documented right here. If that owner had that documented from another veterinarian, then that veterinarian would have had to listen. They were wrong in not listening, and unfortunately it caused the demise of the animal, which that's malpractice. They've got a case. But if you had that documented, and if you had that to show them and say, no, look, it says right here, like I have this other doctor who says right here. So that's why I push people all the time, make sure you have copies of everything.
Jeremy, what say you about this?
I wrote down in capitals, is this in writing? Just because the pet owner said it doesn't mean they can ever prove it. And did whoever did the intake write it down? And if it's not in the records, it didn't happen, and that's unfair. But it's really hard to prove what a pet owner says they told the vet. It's just not. Dr. Morgan said, this is obvious malpractice, except that the insurance company like Zurich, they don't recognize anything as obvious malpractice. So especially if you can't prove it in writing, and this leads to the pet owner guilt that I see. Why didn't I speak up louder? Why didn't I grab the vet and tell them? But they're professionals, and in that setting, this is not how you would act. And people don't insist enough, but you want to make sure that's in the record. And you have to assume that new vet is not going to sit there and read through 30 pages of the record. So you should highlight what it is that they need to know right away.
Okay, Jeremy. So here's a situation that comes up, unfortunately, very frequently, and the words depraved indifference flood into my brain every time I hear this story. And basically, it's a situation where the pet parent brings the companion animal to the vet. There's a need for a surgery or some sort of expensive procedure. And the veterinarian says, I need $5,400 before I touch this animal. In one case, the pet parent was on the phone, frantic, calling friends and family, trying to raise that money. And when she finally did and reported back to the vet that she had the money, the animal had passed away. All right, so this is a common complaint that I hear on a regular basis. So from your perspective, I know in the human world, depraved indifference is a chargeable crime. However, what would you say in this application?
So this is an interesting topic because I have to look at it from a business owner, from a pet owner, and from a pet lawyer. And what we know is veterinarians there's no mandatory, you must treat an animal. In general, that doesn't exist. Now, there's exceptions. If the animal's already at your facility and you've done some work, you may have an obligation, but this is happening more and more, especially because people are going to new emergency hospitals because their vet is just too busy. I have to say, and I ask veterinarians about this all the time, and I ask the frontline workers about it too. This is a fact of life. If you don't charge the person up front, you won't get paid. As an attorney, that's why we get retainers. I can't tell you some of the great work we do for people, and if I didn't get that money up front, it's really difficult to get paid. Now, the work I do, actually, some of the work I do is life or death with a dog. It's not instantaneous life or death, but if it's a dangerous dog, we're trying to keep it off death row. But I'm running a business, and I'm running a business that I need to succeed beyond me so that others will open up a business like this. And veterinarians, more and more veterinarians are not even running their own business anymore. They're being governed or managed by big business and investors who've come in and bought up the practice, and they are held to certain revenue standards and productivity standards. And this is what is driving part of the veterinarians leaving the practice of doing it, because that financial pressure that you're put under as a veterinarian or as a business owner, you can't do the work for free. It's horrible. But imagine what that does to the insides of the veterinarian. I know what it does to me when people say in a custody case, I'll never see my dog again because you won't take the case for free. That's very difficult. But you either do everything for free or you don't. Or you can pick and choose what you'll do for free or pro bono or reduced rate. But this is why they came up with care credit. This is why and lawyers don't have this yet, a way to finance the retainer or the money that's needed to hire a lawyer. Veterinarians have found some middle ground with that. I just think, as wrong as it sounds, I'm a pet owner and you won't help my pet. I just don't. 5 years ago, Scott, I would have thought, how can the vet not do that? And now I understand. And it takes a lot to have to understand that, but it may not even be so much about the money as even trying to fit you in, because the surgeons are so overwhelmed right now. But in trying to hold veterinarians accountable, I think for that, I get it. I get it as a running a small business. I get it as a lawyer, as frustrating as it can be, but I get it as a pet owner. And this is why they've made pet insurance, and why nobody should be in that position anymore, where you have to come up with $5,400. You have pet insurance. They don't make lawyer insurance where you can pay for your lawyer through lawyer insurance. This pet insurance, and how people can walk around with a pet and not have pet insurance, that is why that dog wasn't getting treated, because pet insurance is right there for everybody. And I think that pet owners need to step up and get the pet insurance. It's not nearly as expensive as you think, and it takes that decision making out of your hands, out of the vet's hands.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Back to
Can I comment on that?
Sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I was a small business owner and I owned 2 practices, and my practices were in very low income communities. And he's absolutely right. If you don't get some sort of payment up front, you're working for free.
Right.
I had 13 employees, and I was responsible for my employees being able to feed their children, house their children, and put food on their tables. And if we did everything for free, there's a limit. I did a lot of pro bono work. I did a lot of reduced cost work. I had one client, he was an older gentleman. He had no income. His dog needed an expensive surgery. He said, I will get you the money. That man went out. He collected scrap metal along the road to get the money to pay for what his dog needed. And so what I would say to pet owners who say, I don't have the money, I can't get the money, you find a way to, if I've got a 75-year-old man who is going to go collect scrap metal along the side of the road to get what his dog needs, then we can all figure it out. And, you know, I don't want to say that pets should only belong to people who have the money to pay for them, but we had a pet store near us. They would sell puppies on time payments. If you can't afford the purchase price of the animal, and by the way, one of those puppies came down with parvo and the owners came to me and they said, well, we can't afford to pay you to treat the dog because we have to make the payments to buy the dog. They had no business buying that dog on time, because what were they going to do to get that dog treated if it became ill, which it did, by the way, and all of a sudden it was now on my head, and I was the one who had to go home and not sleep because their puppy was dying of a disease that it never should have had, and they shouldn't have had that puppy because they couldn't afford to feed their children. And so I fault the pet store for pushing that whole situation, which they did that a lot, and that was a big problem. But, and I don't want to say that people don't deserve to have pets if they don't have money, but if it's like having kids. If you can't afford to feed them, you've got to figure it out. You've got to figure out how you're going to handle this. And so if pet insurance is wonderful, care credit is wonderful. We did have people who could not get care credit. They couldn't get $250 on care credit. And then it does become the veterinarian's problem. Like, what do I do with this? And believe me, we go into this it's not because we love people, and it's not because we're going to make big money. We don't. It's because we love those animals and we want to do anything we can for those animals. And believe me, I'm a huge advocate for rescue. I'm a huge advocate for whatever we can do to keep pets in their families and help people out. But it is also a business, and we do have employees. And so if you feed your animal something, they've got an impaction, whatever happens. And this is again why I'm so proactive about keeping your pets healthy so that you don't get in these emergency disaster situations. They get hit by a car, that's a big disaster. You're going to have a big bill. You're going to be in an emergency service. You know, like, be proactive, be as proactive as you can to keep them healthy, feed them a good diet, don't give them chemicals. I think let's keep them as, like, try not to get stuck in that situation. Things still happen. Things happen with my own animals. I get it. Stuff happens, but you've got to, either, have a nest egg for them, have a friend, you can phone a friend, figure out what that's going to be if there's going to be that disaster, because your veterinarian can only do so much. And believe me, there's a lot of pro bono work that goes on, but Jeremy is exactly right. We can't stay in business, particularly the smaller mom and pop shops. If you're corporate, that's I'm not for corporate. It's a totally different ballgame.
One scenario that's come out of that is people will call me and say, the vet said the only way they would save the dog or cat is if I surrender it. So I have to surrender so then that's difficult to grasp, that we will save your animal, but it can't stay with you. I think that's what they're saying, that if you surrender it, then we essentially own the animal and we will do the work. That's when it gets very uncomfortable, and I can't get behind that. But
I know that in my practice, we had that happen a few times. And basically what it usually boiled down to is one of my employees would step up to the plate and say, I really love this animal, I'm willing to pay the bill. So it's not that they're surrendering the animal, it's that somebody else is willing to pay the bill. And I actually, I would say probably a dozen times in my practice career, somebody would be in the waiting room trying to figure out how to get some emergency something done, and somebody else, another client sitting in the waiting room, would step up to the plate and say, I'll pay their bill for them. You'd be amazed how many good people are out there, and people will step up to the plate. We've had people that would go online and do a GoFundMe or do a whatever. But I had other clients that I could call up and say, look, here's the situation. This is what I've got. Would you be willing to help them out? So there are ways to do that. And I would say to anybody who's stuck in that position, it's harder when you're standing in emergency service and you don't know anybody and they don't know you. That's a very difficult situation. But if you're with a veterinarian that you have a relationship with and you've had a relationship with for years, and this is why you want to be nice to them and have a relationship, sometimes they can find funding for you as well.
Okay.
Absolutely. That's a good reminder, I think, for everyone. So Dr. Judy, going back to some of the vaccination talk, specifically with titers vaccination, do you have a specific stance on that? Or, some people are curious about that one in particular because their pets, their companion animals previously died due to various cancers, and now they're concerned about if it was because of vaccinations.
My stance is give the fewest you can possibly get away with. So my animals get very, very, well, they don't get any now. They had them as puppies, kittens. And they had, well, the ones that I've had since they were youngsters, which aren't many because we rescue. But for instance, I've got the 5 kittens that are in my studio right now. They will get 1 vaccine probably at 14 to 16 weeks. That'll be it. They'll get a rabies probably at 6 months, and that'll be it. So it's difficult because I hear it all the time. People say, well, my veterinarian won't see my animal if it's not up to date on at least rabies and sometimes other vaccines. But I would always opt for a titer, whenever possible. And I would give the minimum number of vaccines that you can get away with, for sure.
Great. Jeremy, this question is for you. Is there anything that can be done for people who claim that their companion animal is a service animal, a service dog in particular, but it is not necessarily always apparent or believable that it's a service animal? There was one incident where someone's service animal lunged at another person's dog, and it caused real issue. So is there any way that they could have, in that specific scenario, asked for legal proof that it is in fact a service dog?
So I can save everybody $19.99 right now, because if you go online and get any type of a service dog or emotional support animal license, it's absolutely useless. It's meaningless. And I get this every day now. Emotional support animal or service dog, an emotional support animal help somebody who has a mental disability under the federal legal definition, versus a service dog that helps somebody with a mental or physical disability and performs a task. A service dog can go anywhere in public. An emotional support animal can be with you at your residence. Mm-hmm. The amount of people who think they have a service dog, but it's really a support animal, is outrageous. The amount of people who just say, I have a service dog. If that dog lunges somebody, it's not a service dog. In my opinion, a service dog is a well-trained animal that doesn't respond to any triggers. No triggers, it's just you. So if you have a dog that's lunging, don't try to convince any of us that you have a service dog, and you are doing a disservice to the people who have service dogs. If you have an emotional support animal, the expectation isn't that that animal is doing any work for you, and you can't bring it to a restaurant or things like that. But if you really want to do it right, you get treated by a professional who tells you, yes, you need an emotional support animal that would help you, just like medicine would help you and talk therapy would help you, meditation, whatever it is, and have that person put it in a letter. The other question that was buried in there is, what can somebody ask you if you have a service dog, or you say you have a service dog, and what can they ask you if it's not obvious that you have a need for a service dog? So somebody who's blind, the need is obvious. Somebody in a wheelchair, the need is obvious. They can ask you, it's 2 questions. Basically, do you need, they can't ask you what's wrong with you. Do you need a service dog to help you with a particular task? Yes or no? Does this service dog, does this animal help you with that task? They can't ask you, where'd you get it trained? If this is a service dog, it's unfair because too many people then hide behind the service dog label and ruin it again for people that truly have a service dog. So unless a true service dog, that costs 10, 20. We just had a case where we got a service dog replaced. That's $40,000 to train a service dog properly. There are specific facilities that train service dogs. So just because you may have taught the dog something, part of being a service dog is the training, not about the task, but about how to behave. And if your dog can't behave, it's not a service dog, in my opinion. And I think that it's generally a good rule to follow.
So as a follow-up to that, is it a fair statement that a true service dog, a dog that focuses on a child who is prone to seizures and is trained to throw himself on the ground so that the child will fall on the dog rather than the ground, if something happens to that dog, obviously there's a larger claim in terms of damages, compensatory damages, as well as non-economic damages. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. We've lived it. We've practiced it here. There's a special law in Massachusetts and probably in many states. If you kill or injure a service animal, the damages, it's wide open. Non-economic damages, emotional distress, economic damages, not just trying to repair the dog if it can be repaired, but also replacement. And we've had service animals that have lived, but they can't be a service animal anymore. So the person has that dog and then has to get another dog. So the law, at least in Massachusetts, and I don't think we're alone, recognizes that's a special type of special property.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So I have one more question for Dr. Judy, going back to kind of the actual practice behind the scenes. So does a metabolism affect the amount of anesthesia a companion animal can or should receive during a procedure? And if an owner or a pet parent knows that their companion animal has a less or slower metabolism, do they have the ability to bring that up with the veterinarian without looking like they're overbearing or a bit crazy?
Listen, in all my years of practice, which were a lot, I would say probably half the pet owners said, well, I've got a greyhound. They're susceptible to different kinds of anesthesia. I've got a collie. They're susceptible to different kinds of anesthesia. And yes, there are breed-specific sensitivities to different anesthetics. What I would say is that as veterinarians, we are pretty well trained in those breed specifics as we learn about anesthesia. Now, there are nuances, just like the horse that couldn't take that particular pain medication. There are some animals where maybe in their history they had a reaction to a certain anesthetic. What I would say to pet parents and to veterinarians is, before you undergo any anesthetic procedure with your animal, you make sure you have your pre-op CBC, chem screen, urinalysis, thyroid testing, chest x-rays, EKG. Do all that pre-op. Do not cut corners. If your animal's undergoing anesthesia, you want to know what you have going in. It is amazing how many times we do pre-anesthetic blood work and go, holy crap, his kidneys are shot. We didn't have a clue. We want to change our anesthetic protocol based on, does it need to be metabolized by the kidneys? Does it need to be metabolized by the liver? Does it need to be metabolized differently because this is a sight hound or a specific breed that metabolizes things differently? So again, there are breed specifics. Don't hesitate to bring them up. And I guarantee if you have a breed that I'm a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel person. They all have heart disease. I know that. They all have neurologic disease. I know that. And so if I were taking my dogs into someone else, which I do now, I would not hesitate to say, hey, look, he's got this, this, and this. and I know that we're going to have problems with this anesthesia, and I want you to use something along this lines. Clearly, I have a better background, but if you have an animal that you know could potentially have a sensitivity, do not hesitate to bring it up. And if it's a breed specificity, bring whatever you have researched on that, bring it with you. If you have a written piece of paper that says, hey, my breed is prone to blah, 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 and you have that highlighted and you hand that to them in a very short synopsis, you might open up an eyeball, a brain that says, oh, I wasn't aware of that. Wow, I might have to think about that and research it. So never hesitate to have a conversation. Don't attack them with it. Just say, hey, I've read that, and I've talked to other people that have this particular breed, or if you know that your particular animal has a sensitivity, say, look, again, here's my records to show he went under anesthesia before and it didn't go well. We got to follow this. So again, being well armed with all of your information, and, not just, this is my word saying it. It's like, look, here's something that proves it. This is a good resource. It's not your neighbor who said it. This is a good resource. And if you can bring those resources with you, it's going to be much more credible and get you where you need to be.
Perfect.
Colleen, if I could just follow up to that with just the ultimate in pet owner guilt. I got a call a couple weeks ago from a veterinarian who took her dog to a veterinarian. And she's new to the area, so it's not like she has a reputation yet and doesn't know people. And she didn't want to be that person, that veterinarian that told you how to do things. And the dog had some problems that they treated in one way they pumped the dog full of steroids, and she wanted to be hands off, and the dog died. I'm simplifying it, but afterwards she got the records and she read through them, and she saw that there was a blood test that clearly indicated that whatever the problem was with this dog, it was a problem that you would never treat with steroids. And so she's a pet owner. She's a veterinarian in the same state. So imagine how we all feel when we didn't jump up and down and tell the vet, make sure you do this. So she has that guilt because she didn't want to be an annoying professional. Then she has the guilt of she went to a vet that she didn't know about. She didn't stand up and yell. And now she has the pressure of, does she say something to the vet? Does she do something to the vet? Does she go to the board, or does she keep her mouth shut? And then karma is a big factor. And do you want to be the person that goes to the board or sues? Do you want to be a veterinarian in the same state that you sue a veterinarian? The pressure, and then she hears from me, and I'm trying not to put any pressure, but Joey's legacy and how we have to hold veterinarians accountable. That's a tough position for somebody to be in. I feel like maybe if she was at the end of her career, the choice would be a little bit easier for her if she wasn't just trying to crack into the community here. But I don't know how pet owners feel anyway. It's so difficult, but I don't know how she can come back from this in terms of what it's doing to her mind right now.
I lost one of my dogs to veterinary malpractice.
And what is that like?
Sucks. It sucks. It's one of those, why did I leave her with them? Why? And, look, I don't beat myself up over it. I did not take them to the state board. It was not in my state, but I did not take them to the state board. I raised a big stink at the practice. And my dog was there because the surgeon that I wanted was there. I wasn't a fan of the practice, but the surgeon that I needed for that dog was there. But she was there on the weekend in ICU, and their ICU team was the worst, the absolute worst. And by the time I got there on Monday, it's one of those, I had to work a 12-hour day in my clinic. I had to take care of 50 patients on my end and had no choice other than to wait until the end of the day to be able to get to my dog. And when I got there, my dog was taking her last breath. And I feel for that veterinarian, because as you know, it's like a lawyer taking another lawyer to the board. It's taking your colleague before the board. I've gotten over my guilt. I'm fine. But if you think that I will ever leave one of my pets at an emergency service, I now have home oxygen. I have home drugs. I have home IV fluids. I can do that at home, and I feel bad for pet parents who cannot do that at home. And that, again, is why we are empowering people to do as much as you can at home, so that you never have to leave your pet away from you. And that was something that we even changed in our daily practice. We didn't have anybody in the practice overnight, so we would not hospitalize patients overnight. They went to a 24-hour service where somebody would be, but 99% of the time, we taught the owners how to care for them overnight and have them come back in the morning. Because I can guarantee you that a pet owner will sit there and stare at their pet all night long, watch every breath, everything that goes in, everything that goes out, and they will come back and report it in the morning to me much better than going to a service where they're one of 50 animals in a cage where they might get looked at once or twice, if at all. So, sorry, you hit a hot button for me, but it stinks. And this is one of the reasons why I like Joey's legacy. This is one of the reasons why I think we need to hold people accountable. And believe me, there are very few bad actors out there. There are not veterinarians who are out there trying to kill animals. The guy down the street from me in my practice in New Jersey, he didn't give a darn. He didn't care. Hey, Stuart, my dog's upset. Oh. He didn't care. And I would have loved to have seen him be put out of business. I did my best to put him out of business by opening up down the street from him. And we can't have that happen all the time. We don't get that lucky, that somebody else will come in and highlight how bad they are. Those people we do need to put out of business. We do need to hold them accountable, and we do need to hold the vet boards accountable. And I really like that idea of suing the vet boards for not holding them accountable. I think we hit something tonight.
There, that when we went to the quarterly meeting, that was December 2018 of the Florida board, His Highness the chairman stood up and proclaimed that the Florida vet board would rather rehab a veterinarian than revoke a license, which told me everything I needed to know at that point. And
but what are they doing to rehab them?
Oh, $1,000 fine, some continuing education, public reprimand, which people don't know about unless they know where to look. So that's their idea of rehab in Florida. And it's just a big joke. And that's the same in every state. I've been doing this over almost 5 years now, hundreds and hundreds of cases of this stuff. And I cannot recall one case where someone said to me, hey, you know what? I filed a complaint with the vet board. They were so caring. They really took it seriously. And they really put it to that veterinarian who killed my dog, who caused the death of my dog. Kill is an intentional word, and I apologize for using that. Although I know it happens here and there, but it's never my intent to use the word kill, because I know that's an intentional act. To cause the death of my dog. I cannot recall one case where someone came to me and was happy with the actions of the vet board. So, they all, operate out of the same playbook.
True. Well, I just want to say thank you both so much for joining us tonight. This was a really special roundtable. We've had people in the comments just sing both of your praises, and it's obvious how passionate and devoted you both are. So thank you so much for bringing your resources, your time, your energy, your intellect, all of it to the table. And we just really appreciate you being here with us this evening.
And we're going to invite you both back real soon. This is going to be one of the more popular podcasts that we've had. I can guarantee that.
That's great to know. Anything we can do for you.
Thank you.
To keep this going.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity, Scott.
Absolutely,
Well,
Jeremy.
and-
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Morgan, nice.
Dr. Morgan, thank
Nice
you.
meeting you. Thank you.
Hope you all have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Good night, everyone.